On this episode of the Highway 62 podcast, I interview Cary Baker, author of Down on the Corner, Adventures in Busking and Street Music. That's coming up next. All right, Cary Baker, welcome to the Highway 62 podcast. How are you today?
I'm great. Good to be here.
Thanks so much. You are an author. Your new book, Down on the Corner, Adventures in Busking and Street Music, is
Indeed.
out now.
It is out now, yes.
Picked out a copy over at Desert General for myself.
Yay.
And before, we get into details of the book, kind of what that's all about, you also have an event coming up this next weekend. Give us just a little bit of your background, how you came to be who you are and how you ended up living out here in the desert.
It's a long answer, though. Be prepared. I'm a native of Chicago, Illinois, from the South Side, home of the blues. And although I grew up in the suburbs and kind of a sheltered existence, and when my father took me to a rundown neighborhood in the inner city of Chicago called Maxwell Street Market, kind of a flea market where his Eastern European immigrant parents used to take him shopping, buying, trading, mingling. But in the years since my father was a kid, it had become kind of a black neighborhood. And guess what? A lot of Chicago classic blues singers started singing on the streets. And I didn't really know much about Maxwell Street, but I was starting to like blues a little bit. By now it was about 1970, and I'd heard blues on FM radio in Chicago. I'd heard Muddy Waters' Electric Mud. So my father took me to Maxwell Street one day, wanted to show me where he used to go as a kid. And lo and behold, all these blues street singers, but in particular, there was one whose name was Arvella Gray, blind Arvella Gray, a blind man playing a metal guitar with a slide, and you could just hear this metal on metal, this clanging for blocks away. We parked our car and I thought, Dad, we got to follow the music. So we just listened to this guy for like an hour. My dad said, can we go yet? No, I need to listen to this guy more. And finally I did tap him on the shoulder because he was playing one song endlessly, and asked him for his name and address, the name and phone number. And I was about 16 years old, but I like to write. I was good at English, and I was features editor of the high school newspaper. And I called him up one day after school and his day off and playing on the streets, and asked if I could do an interview with him. And I didn't know what I was going to do with that interview, but then I was this free publication called the Chicago Reader, kind of the Village Voice or the LA Weekly of Chicago. And I thought, well, I'll just mail in an on speculation article to these guys, and I'm 16 years old and not all that sophisticated, but let's see what they do. And they ran it. And that was my beginning in so many ways. It was the beginning of my writing career, and it was the beginning of my appreciation of street musicians. And, from there, I was over at Northern Illinois University, moved back to the city of Chicago. One day, the punk new wave magazine called Trouser Press called me up and said, is Milwaukee anywhere near Chicago? And I'm like, yeah, I could be there in about 90 minutes. What do you need? And they said, well, there's this new group called the Violent Femmes. The thing about them is that they're kind of punk rock, but on acoustic instruments. So they're folk punk. I thought, well, that sounds cool. I could be there in 90 minutes. And this is before you could like listen to a SoundCloud link.
Sure.
I didn't even know what they sounded like. I mean, other than the description, I didn't know who was in the band. I hadn't seen a bio. So I just went up there blind. I hadn't heard their music. So I said, well, that's no problem. Let's go out to where we began in the streets. And there they are playing their acoustic instruments on the street, in the streets of Milwaukee, right under the movie theater marquee where they had been discovered by the Pretenders. So they were like busking in front of a Pretenders gig. They were just like local kids. Chrissy Hines and the late James Honeyman Scott from the Pretenders said, hey, you guys aren't bad. You want to open up for our real opening act? So it was like a 3-act show. The Violent Femmes, for local buskers, then whoever the opening act was, and then the Pretenders. And they got signed to Warner and Slash Records from that. And then I got an offer to work for. I like record companies as well as writing, and I got an offer I couldn't refuse. It was the middle of winter in Chicago, friggin' freezing out.
Yeah.
I hear that there's a job open at IRS Records, home of the Go-Go's, REM,
Yeah.
Fine Young
Police.
Cannibals,
Yeah.
English Beat, Concrete Blonde. I put in a resume, and so did 60 other people, by the way. But they asked if I could be in LA like next week for an interview, and I found a way to get there and moved to LA. You got to take a walk down Venice Boardwalk. And so I'm walking down Venice Boardwalk, and my eyes are all over the place at babes in bikinis and the beach and the weightlifters and the everything. And it's like psychic overload for me. But lo and behold, I hear this sound, and it's the sound of a guy playing soul or blues, sounding like Otis Redding. And I turn around, it's this guy, and I later find out his name was Ted Hawkins. And the thing about Ted Hawkins is he had been imprisoned. He had been in institutions. He had a kind of a hard life. But here he is playing, wonderful soul music like Otis Redding. And within a few months of that, he was actually signed by Geffen Records, the same guy who signed Beck, and got to make a major label record. So that's really my trifecta of like busking and street music.
Yeah.
And I listen to a lot of music indoors too. This week I'm
Sure.
seeing McCartney and The Who and inside, not playing Highway 111 or Highway 62, but
Yeah. Yeah.
actually indoors. But I've always had a thing for buskers. So when it came time to closed my company. I've had a music publicity company for a long time, and we moved out to the desert. We live in other desert cities. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I decided it was time to write a book, and thought of the idea of busking for the book. And that's really how my book, Down on the Corner, which was in busking and street music, came to be. I knew at least, 3 great stories. I'd done some interviews already, and I knew how to get, I knew how to contact people blind,
Right. Right. I'm
websites
sure.
or through the representatives, had some connections. And not everybody I wanted to talk to got back to me. Thank you, Tracy Chapman. Thank you, Jewel. Thank you, Glenn Hansard. But and a lot of them had passed away. A lot of great street singers, Moondog from New York, and a lot of blues guys. Lionel Lemon Jefferson died in 1929.
Yeah.
Louis Armstrong, Dory. But I used to piece their story together through secondary sources. I talked to whoever I could. I talked to eyewitnesses. Found a lot of eyewitnesses of doo-wop music, street corner doo-wop R&B. And actually found 1 or 2 surviving doo-wop singers. So it was amazing who I could find, 38 chapters
Yeah.
worth, and I must have done about 100, 125 interviews. And it was a
Yeah.
pleasure.
That's amazing.
The book wrote itself. I really had a great time writing it, and I did 78 chapters instead of 38. But at some point, I just had to call it a book, at least a volume 1.
Yeah. Hearing you talk about your upbringing, I was born in Naperville, Illinois, so
Oh, there you
southwest
go.
suburbs of Chicago, and I
Hmm.
lived on the north side for a while, and that's where my music career started. But hearing you talk about these blues artists and these legends really kind of brought me back to being a kid, and obviously at the time you don't realize like how impactful those artists were on popular music, and I was thinking about my parents and we used to go to Chicago Fest. Remember
I
Chicago
sure
Fest? And
do.
they'd have the
Yeah,
WLUP stage
that's
and the
right.
blues, rock
Hmm.
around the dock, and then the
Yep.
blues stage. And we spent a lot of time at that blues stage, and just over the years, I saw so many great blues artists in Chicago. And when I worked for Guitar Center, then I, met a lot of those people. We're probably, maybe similar in age and whatnot. So probably actually have maybe crossed paths with a lot of the same people.
Probably.
So I was the original drummer in the band Material Issue. I don't know
No
if you
kidding.
remember them.
Well, I
Yeah.
remember Material Issue, and of course I
Yeah.
knew, or not of course, but I did know the band Shoes from
Yeah. So
whose member Jeff Murphy produced the
I
first Material
just,
Issue album.
yes. I recorded at Short Order Recorder with Jeff Murphy for weeks on end. I left Material Issue before they became popular. The
Hmm.
usual story. I ended up with one song on the first, the International Pop Overthrow record. I just recently, like a month ago, recorded a drum track in my garage for a song that Jeff Murphy wrote and sang.
Which one?
Brand new song. Me and Jeff and the old original bass player from Material Issue, they reached out to me and just were like, hey, me
Wow.
and Jeff are doing some songs. You want to throw some drums down? Jeff Murphy and I are still friends and, texting once a week as of now. So,
Well, for the benefit of those people out there who don't know who Shoes was,
yeah.
the Midwest used to be a terrible place for rock and roll. Aria, Speedwagon, Styx, Head East. It was all corporate rock. And then
Yeah.
Cheap Trick, who I knew from, they were
From Rockford, yeah.
DeKalb, Illinois. I used to see 3 sets a night by Cheap Trick for $5. And I used to write about them a lot. So Shoes found me and they sent me their album Black Vinyl Shoes. And it was just the consummate power pop album of all time.
Yeah.
Just a wonderful album. And they became great friends of mine.
Yeah, there is this interesting, and we're going deep here, so only maybe the Midwesterners are going to enjoy this. But there is a very unique, like Chicago pop sound
That's right.
when you look at Shoes. Do
Off
you
Broadway.
remember a band called The Kind?
I do.
Yep. The Kind off Broadway. It was
Mhm.
a very specific pop that also had a holdover of kind of a new wave
Right.
element to it that I just
Hezbane.
loved, that sound. And I still, still love it today. In the book, you start to kind of give a history of busking. For the odd listener that might not really know what it is, what is it and what is that history? Where do we think it started?
Busking, I believe, can be defined as, performing outside. Performing music is what I was interested in, but busking goes back to ancient Rome and ancient Greece, and there were orators and there were plays, and there was Shakespeare in the 1400s being performed outside. And my book really kind of starts around 1920 in the USA, when you could find, if you were inclined, you could have found Louis Armstrong playing trumpet and cornet in the French Quarter of New Orleans. You could find Blind Lemon Jefferson, one of the early blues guys, playing in the Deep Ellum district of Dallas, which is still the music district down there.
Yep.
You could find all kinds of people playing in Chicago. And later on, getting into the 40s, you could find blues singers in Chicago, and Reverend Gary Davis in Harlem, and get into the 50s, doo-wop music, all these kind of Black, Italian, and Jewish singing groups. And there are very few survivors of that movement, but I did find Jay Siegel, nice Jewish boy from New York, who was in the the Tokens, The Lion Sleeps Tonight. So
Okay.
he was he gave me some great stories of playing Rockaway Beach. I managed to find a few really old guys who gave me the time of day. There was a whole scene in the 50s and 60s then in Inch Village. Well, actually, Washington Square outside, outdoors. A lot going on in the clubs of Greenwich Village, but, the days were long. So these guys played outside in Washington Square, and there were all kinds of ordinance problems with performing outside. There have always been busking ordinances, and there was a beatnik riot in 1961 that helped liberate busking, at least, in the parks and the streets under certain conditions in New York. The funny
Was
thing
there
is
kind of a was there would you say there was like a heyday or a time frame where it was, the most common or most, popular time frame in history?
well, I'd say that, nowadays might be the most popular time. I mean,
Okay.
granted, you won't find Moondog in Midtown. You won't find some of the players that I covered, but the thing is, you can buy almost anything you want sitting at your computer on Amazon. So how are you going to get people downtown? And people go for more than just merchandise when they go shopping on Main Street. They want a live experience. They want interaction. They want an odd smile. They want a cup of coffee. They want things you can't necessarily get on Amazon. And one of those things is busking. I was surprised, though, that, the 3rd Street Promenade in Santa Monica, LA, seems to be waning. A lot of stores closing, and it's too bad because you could find a lot of buskers there. But you can find them.
Interesting.
It's one of the attractions of Venice Boardwalk.
Yeah, yeah.
Not only was there this guy I mentioned who sounded like Otis Redding, Ted Hawkins, but there was Cary, who was a guy with his Eddie Van Halen like electric guitar on roller skates with a turban, and I saw him fall once, and he was looking at his guitar to make sure it's not broken, and he got back up on
Sure,
his feet and
sure.
started skating and singing with his pig nose amp. I mean, that kind of stuff is priceless. And New Orleans has come to the conclusion that people go there,
Yeah.
to hear music. And if you can hear music in Jackson Square or Royal Street in the French Quarter, that's
Yeah.
priceless. And
Yeah, I've
Chicago
heard
has revived, Maxwell
yeah.
Street got demolished. The Maxwell Street that I went to is now I drove by it this past July when I was in Chicago. It's all, luxury condominiums and Starbucks and Jamba Juice. But there's a place called the New Maxwell Street across the
Okay.
expressway, across the Dan Ryan, Maxwell Street. It's not really Maxwell Street; it's Des Plaines Street. But they have a whole rainbow coalition of buskers: Latino, Black, white rock bands, suburbanites, inner city people. Busking is alive and well.
Okay,
I was
that's really interesting to hear because that was something the second half of the question was going to be: is it disappearing or is it still a thing? So it's great to hear that that it's still a thing. I guess I assumed that probably there was a whole crackdown of restrictions or laws or permitting or things like that that might make it tougher nowadays. I don't know if that's the case or
no,
not.
things have actually loosened up.
That's great.
And, I've actually seen a little bit of it in the desert. And of course, it gets pretty hot in the summer. But I was walking down through downtown Palm Springs and saw an old man playing Lady of Spain on the accordion. And I loved him. And I just stood, and I always tip buskers. Well, I got to keep my good busker karma. Tipped them a
Yeah.
couple of bucks, took some photos. I was coming out of a yoga class in La Quinta, and lo and behold, the Sprouts parking lot is a young guy with a little dog playing violin, just playing his violin in the parking lot, right in like a strip mall parking lot. God bless him. I tipped him $5, and we're up in San Luis Obispo and Morro Bay over the dead of summer, and boy, San Luis Obispo is the busker capital. For a little
Yeah.
city of
I love
40,000,
it. I love that city.
it's got like a San Francisco like downtown. You
Yeah,
think you were in
yeah.
a big city, but it's really a little
Yeah.
city. But on every corner were buskers. And I tipped all of them and took all of their pictures. And the same with Morro Bay on Farmers Market night. Now, I was in 29 Palms for the book festival they have every November. I gave a presentation last November and interviewed a bunch of California music book authors. But I was a little early for my panel, and I took a walk around the farmer's market and got myself a coffee and some food. And I'm looking around, and there's a guy playing kind of smooth jazz guitar outside with an amp, but he had kind of a backing track,
Yeah,
do,
yeah,
do,
yeah.
do, 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 do. And I decided then and there that that's where I draw the line. That's not busking. That's too locked into a backing track. That's not
Yeah,
spontaneous.
technology's added a little element there to it. I've actually never busked in my life. I mean, I'm challenged with it because as a drummer, it's a far more challenging
Oh,
endeavor
yeah,
because you got a
sure it
bunch of
is.
crap you got to carry,
Mm-hmm.
and you're much more likely to annoy some folks with the noise. But they do make these little portable, cool little drum kits that I've always sort of, you can pack them up in like a suitcase practically, and then it unfolds, and
Mm-hmm.
that might be a cool way to do it. Or I could bust out my washboard that I've been
There you go.
learning to play, which learned from Washboard Chaz down there in New Orleans. Um, Although I do play a little bit of guitar now, and I actually have a new guitar showing up UPS like any minute. This
Well, if you
Gretsch
sing,
Jim
if you
Dandy,
sing,
and I can sing. Yeah, I just
then
don't play guitar very well.
vocals and washboard could be a thing. You never know.
You know what? That might be my ticket. I'm getting a little old to be. I'm almost 60. I'm getting a little bit old to be playing the full-on fast punk rock that my band still does. Somehow I'm able to get through the shows, but I'm feeling it more and more. So yeah, maybe the washboard and some vocals is my ticket out
Could be,
to
could
start some
be.
busking. So keep your eyes open around 29 Palms, everybody, because you never know. You might see me over at Freedom Plaza with a coffee and my washboard doing some tunes.
Well, one of the lessons that I learned by interviewing all these artists were that a lot of people start busking at the beginning of their career. And I interviewed a number of them that went from like college. Cindy Williams, for instance, Boy Dog Pondering. So many
Yeah.
started as buskers. But I interviewed one artist. I don't know if you've heard of Fantastic Negrito. See the name?
No.
Fantastic
Uh-uh.
Negrito is kind of a folk blues guy, and he's won a few Grammys. And I think he's won a few Hana Awards and Blues Awards. Anyway, he's this guy up in Oakland, and his real name is Xavier, and he's got a very long African last name that I'll never be able to pronounce, but Xavier. And Xavier, as a teen, is like a young guy, maybe 20 years old, was signed to Interscope Records, like in the 90s. And if you get signed to Interscope, you're going to be no doubt
Sure.
nails. You're gonna be a hit. But Xavier never made it, so they dropped Xavier. Interscope Records dropped him, negated his contract, and he went back to Oakland and started a pot farm, which of course is legal. And he was a pot farmer, but just for a sense of purpose, he started to play. And by now he's not a young guy anymore. And he started to play out on the streets of Oakland and found out that he wasn't Xavier. He wasn't this R&B rap Prince type singer that Interscope was trying to package. Instead, he was this kind of folk blues guy. And that's what he learned midlife. I mean, maybe a little early for midlife, but midlife as a busker.
Yeah.
People have done that like in the middle of their careers. Some careers have been subverted by busking. But Billy Bragg, who I was fortunate enough to interview, told me that he doesn't do sound checks. He plays lots of festivals. And of course, if there's a worthy protest, he'll go and play that protest because he's an activist. But he doesn't worry about sound checks because he didn't have them when he was a busker. He just sort of got into tune as needed.
Yeah. You got to figure it out.
By the first song, he's in tune. So, all these bands have sound checks, but not Billy Bragg because he was a busker.
Yeah. I wanted to read a description here of the book, and then talk a little bit about an upcoming event. It says, in his debut, Down on the Corner, Cary Baker traces the hidden history of buskers across America, from the 1920s to today. Mixing vivid stories with deep research, he pays tribute to the singers, pickers, and crooners who transformed sidewalks, subway platforms, and street corners into stages. It's a
Right.
great, I love the description of it. And looking through the book, I love how each chapter is almost just like a different story about a different artist that you've encountered and talked to. So now, this coming Saturday,
Not this coming.
no, not this coming Saturday, the following Saturday, the 11th, you're going to be out at Tin Town and Desert General, correct?
I am. I'm looking forward to that. I've gotten to know Patrick, who runs Desert General, because he runs the book festival every November, and I won't be participating in that. I did last year, but yeah, you're right. Saturday the 11th, 2 Saturdays from when we were speaking, uh, I will be there at 5 p.m. And I'll be interviewed by a very esteemed LA music journalist named Steve Hockman, who has
Yeah.
become a full citizen of LA and Joshua Tree in recent
Oh, okay.
months. So Steve is now a desert rat when he's not a beach boy. Um, and Steve has written for the LA Times. He's written for Spin. He's written for all kinds of folk and bluegrass and miscellaneous magazines, and he's also his wife Susan Hayden runs a kind of poetry and spoken word series called Library that he has kind of rediscovered himself as a storyteller. He'll be my interviewer. He and I had been friends for 40 years. When I moved to town in 1984, town meaning LA, from Chicago, he was one of the first people to call me up and introduce himself. So we've been friends ever since. So Steve Hockman, and also of note to the high desert, Pat Kearns, half of the Kearns family, and the DJ on Z107.7 with the local show. He and his wife Twiggy Pop are the Kearns family, and they play high desert spots constantly. You can see them in Spaghetti Western or just about
Yeah.
anywhere. So he will be. Susan unfortunately has a scheduling conflict, but Pat is going to be busking for us, and I'm very excited about that. He's one of the first
Cool.
people I met in the scene. I came to town and I thought, boy, such a music scene in the high desert and the low desert. Let's not forget Palm Springs goes back to Sinatra and Sonny
Sure,
Bono
sure.
and Elvis Presley, and there's a whole Palm Desert grunge scene that you can look up in under Palm Desert grunge scene. The people know about. And then there's the, Flying Burrito Brothers and Graham Parsons, and then Victoria
Yep.
Williams and Louise Goffin, and then Teddy Quinn and Bobby First, and such a scene that I got to town and I queried No Depression magazine, the magazine of alt country Americana. I told him about the scene, and one of the first people to really be helpful to me and lead me to other musicians in town was Pat Kearns. He, along with Teddy Quinn, and Lee Joseph and Jessica Van Rabbit were very good sources for me for that story.
Great. Well, I look forward to the event. I'm going to try to make it out to that for
Great.
sure. It's a really cool area over there. If you haven't made it over to Tin Town and Desert General, the bookstore that Patrick and Francois do is amazing. Just great, curated, books, lots of great stuff about the local area and the desert. And I'm really looking forward to this one. It's right up my alley, of course, with, the music background. So, Cary, thank you so much
My
for
pleasure.
joining me here on the show. And yeah, I encourage everybody to run out and grab a copy of the book. Thank you so much for being with me.
Great. Thank you. I'll look forward to seeing you in a few weeks. Take care.
Right on.